All right, it's 7 p.m. I will go ahead and call this special meeting to order. Roll call, Ms. Widener.
Dr. Campley? Mr. Fountain?
Here.
Mr. Keenan?
Here.
Mr. Liggett? Mr. McKinney?
Here.
Dr. Sadler?
Here.
Mr. Saylor?
Here.
Dr. Weston?
Here.
Ms. White?
Here. 1.03, 1.04, Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silent reflection. Where were we last? I think Mr. Liggett. Mr. Weaver, would you mind reading the mission statement?
The mission of the Perkiomen Valley School District is to cultivate an inclusive community of learners empowered to grow intellectually, socially, and emotionally.
Thank you so much, Mr. Weaver. And with that, I open up the floor to comments on any topic. Anyone in the community is welcome to comment for a duration of 3 minutes. Please state your name and municipality, and the floor is open.
Valerie Drury, Skippack Township. First, I wanted to say how much I appreciated the robust conversation among the entire board last meeting on the grade realignment. That was good to see and very appreciative. Second, I wanted to acknowledge Mr. Pete. He's the SPO at Skippack Elementary. I have a fourth grader at Skippack. And whenever there's an event at Skippack, Mr. Pete is there. And most recently, we had the Skippack Family Bingo Night, to which was a great event, as usual, by Home and School. And the kids get so excited to see him. They want to say hi. They want to give high fives. He has fostered a great relationship with the students there, and it's very evident. Initially, I was on the fence about the SPOs when the idea of having them was first discussed. But I listened to the town halls, and I appreciated from hearing from law enforcement as well as the surrounding school districts. But most importantly, I appreciated the discussion within our own community. I was very grateful for the well-planned and diligent hiring process. All that dedicated time and careful thought brought Mr. Pete to Skippack Elementary, so thank you. Thirdly, a note of appreciation goes to Mr. Saylor. At last board meeting, Mr. Saylor brought up the subject of hatred during final board comments, specifically anti-Semitism. One such incident that he brought up happened with his son seeing a picture of Hitler in the bathroom. And I'm very sorry that that happened. Sadly, there's a rise in anti-Semitism within this country, and this absolute hatred is unacceptable. However, it would be intensely hypocritical to not take this time to call out all forms of hatred against all marginalized groups. One such incident of hate was within our own PV community was the appearance of trans stickers on stop signs on the PV campus grounds in fall of 2023. If you recall, the sticker was strategically placed under the word stop, and it would read stop trans. So I'm sure, Mr. Saylor, this trans community can empathize with your son and how he may have felt seeing that picture in his school bathroom. Maybe he felt fear, terror, or threatened. Sadly, your son and those trans students have that awful experience in common. None were right, and neither should have happened. We must speak out on all forms of hate, and not just the ones that affect us personally, so to avoid being thought of as a hypocrite, but rather a supporter of all marginalized groups. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Is there anyone else? All right, seeing none, we have two. We'll move on to education section, which is section 2. We have two business items for approval of pilots, a vote to approve pilots.
I think, can I just interrupt?
Oh, of course.
I think we need an approval for the agenda since these are on there for today.
Okay.
Otherwise,
then
we're
we would need to
violating.
amend the agenda to include that.
Yeah,
Motion.
I'm just going to make a motion to approve the agenda for today's meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Saylor. Is there a second? Motion and a second. Any comments or questions on that? Seeing none, all in favor? Against? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Saylor. And so that brings us to 2.01. It's a motion to approve 3 guidance software pilots as presented. Is there a motion?
Moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Against? Motion carries. 2.02 is a motion to approve 2 music resource pilots as presented. Is there a motion?
Second.
And a motion and a second. Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, all in favor? Against? Motion carries. Those are our 2 business items. And that brings us to 2.03, the main event, annual data presentation. Dr. Russell.
Thank you, Ms. White, and good evening, Board of School Directors. This is our annual data presentation. You have before you a summary version. You have also received a longer version, which is much more comprehensive and includes a lot of data. We have streamlined or summarized this version and grounded it in our comprehensive plan goals, which really focus on math proficiency, the proficiency on the part of our ELs, or English learners, special education students, and then also student wellness, student health and wellness. You will hear from a variety of administrators this evening, similar to what we did last year. We're tapping into the expertise of our team, and you can see them sprinkled throughout the library. And they'll come up to the podium at different points. Maybe you saw their names on some of the slides. But we want to inform you of how our students are doing as learners. There's a variety of data we'll touch upon this evening. You have more data, so if you have questions, we'd like to entertain those after we go through the slides. We will also present some recommendations for resources. Hoping that you feel better informed in both of those areas after this evening. And we think about, as we embark upon this conversation about our students as learners and some of the data that helps us to know how they're doing on their path towards proficiency and post-graduation success, we think about all of the different measures that we have available. We start with our assessment schedule, and these are the many assessments that we employ to learn about our students as learners. These are approved both for the elementary and secondary at the beginning of the school year. We also shared an additional chart that we were provided through our data warehouse Linkit, which informs you of how our students are doing relative to other students across the Commonwealth. Really compared to the other traditional public schools, there are about 499 across the Commonwealth that have data in these numbers. So these charts help you to know, based on Keystone and PSSA results across the board for all students, 23-24 for example, how our students performed relative to other students across the state. We also look to schooldigger.com. We are the 5th highest in Montgomery County, 51 out of all schools reported. And according to Niche, we are the 6th highest in Montgomery County and 29th overall relative to all of the schools that were ranked by this particular website. So again, sometimes we hear talk of School Digger, we hear talk of Niche. These are the more common online platforms. Another way to measure the success of the school district. We continue to think about how we prepare our students to be future ready, help them to feel safe and supported in our schools, and the partnerships that support our efforts to get students to where they need to be. Shared beliefs. And these are the goals that I referenced just a minute or two ago. These are the goals that are grounding this presentation tonight. This is what we have pulled for you because these are the goals that we've been focused on out of our current comprehensive plan. So The data, while it often starts with ELA, we're going to start with math this evening, talk through that, and then look at some of the examples of the data we have for our English learners, our special education students, some of the things that we're doing to support their learning, and then what are we doing around student wellness, physical, emotional, and mental health. So you see before you the team, you have the instructional administrative team here along with cabinet members. And again, as I mentioned, different members of the team will speak at different points in the conversation, and all of us would be available for particular questions. Last year, we started by, right out of the gate, introducing to you some of the recommendations, both human resources and instructional resources. You've seen this slide before. We've talked about the need for an occupational therapist, as well as, I'll jump to the end, counselor/social worker. We are currently contracting services to provide those student services. And it's gotten to the point where we really need to employ individuals in these roles. You have already approved athletic trainers for the district, and you have approved cafeteria monitors that have afforded elementary teachers time to meet as PLCs and really dialogue about what's happening for students, what could happen for students, all leading to improved outcomes. The special ed teacher is a question mark. Initially, when we considered that back in December for the first time with you, we were looking at high early intervention numbers. All of those students and their families move through IEPT meetings. We're not 100% certain. We need to continue to ask for that position, so stay tuned. Special ed will speak to that as they continue moving through those early intervention meetings. But that will help us to know whether or not a position is justified and needed to support those students. So that's iffy right now. Stay tuned. And these are the instructional resources that we have discussed. At the elementary level, we are currently piloting a math resource, iReady. It is the same resource that was recently implemented at the middle level. We are also piloting middle level ELA resources. Again, they come up in the cycle, and we are due for new resources there. They're being investigated, and they'll be touched upon a little bit later on. We've talked to you about a shift to the high school schedule in the form of a Viking zone where students would be invited to come in early and start their school day in whatever way they need to, whether that's with teachers, whether that's with students they're working on a project with, whether that's to make up work, whether it's to actually get some physical exercise. But the Viking zone accommodates those different activities for students and really attempts to target students where they may have academic needs, so that they can meet with, have FaceTime with the teachers or staff members that can support them in achieving that. And then we have a K-5 resource. You just approved piloting of that. We're looking forward to supporting our K-5 students with an updated resource. There will be more about that as we move through the spring. I appreciate your approval of the pilot, though. Thank you. And doing that tonight. Thank you. So we start this presentation just very briefly with demographics. You've seen some of these slides. You have seen that our enrollment continues to trend downward. If we look back 10 years, we've decreased by about 1,000 students. This bar chart shows you how enrollment has changed by race over time. And you can see, if you look closely, it's difficult to discern that the population of whites is declining while population of Hispanic is increasing. You see a slight increase in the area of Black, African American, and then 2 or more races. Asian has remained pretty constant. Throughout the data presentation, our district will be compared to what's called comparison groups. We'll be compared to other school districts across the Commonwealth who have a percentage of economically disadvantaged students in that 20 to 30% band. That's where we fall, 23.5 for the 23-24 school year. So we are compared to, there are 37 districts total. The names of those districts are on a slide. So the system compares us to them. That's a common variable used in comparing school districts. We're compared to the county, and we're also compared to the state. And you'll see that. So that just enlarges that portion of this particular screenshot to highlight some of those comparison groups and how many districts are in there and what the actual percentages are of some of the disaggregated groups. These are the districts in that 20 to 30% band. Economic disadvantage, the percentage of students that qualify and participate in free or reduced lunch has increased over time also. Again, if we go back 10 years, you've seen this slide if you attended the opening day, it's increased by about 10%. So we're up to 23.5 district-wide for the 23-24 school year. Gifted student percentages, again, FYI, just to sort of wind down some of that demographic information, informational for you, along with some of the other demographics that you'll see throughout related to our English learner population and our special ed population. So we'll spend some time talking about those groups of students, how they're doing as learners, and what we're doing to support them in their efforts. So we're going to start with mathematics, and we've combined it with science just because they often go together. However, before we jump into some of the data and the achievement, I will invite Dr. Amy Sachs, who is a house principal here at our high school, and Mr. Dave DeAndrea, principal at Middle School East, to talk a little bit about the backbone and the frameworks that we have in place and some of the exercises that we move through as we discuss data and support our students on a broad scale. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. This evening, we're just going to touch on multi-tiered systems of support. We refer to it as the MTSS, and we talk about it being a framework. And there's a reason for that, because all these components that we talk about this evening are fitting into that. And I think of it kind of like, and I know we have it here as a triangle, but like a bookshelf. There's a place for everything and a reason for everything, right? So as we talk about resources, as we talk about tiers of intervention and supports, I want you to think about that we have certain things that already fit into this, but there are things that we need to enhance, that we need to create new, or look at how we need to support better, okay? As part of MTSS framework, we also have 3 various components to it. You have your academic, which we're talking about this evening. We're talking about behavioral components, and there's also the social emotional component. All 3 of those components work together for a successful student. Okay, we can have students that exist across multiple tiers. Okay, you may have a student that's very high academic achieving, but maybe struggling social emotionally. Okay, there may be other things going on. Okay, so our goal is to work with all of our support systems across helping a student be most successful as a child of whole, right? And manage that throughout their career here. We've worked pretty diligently over the past few years talking to you about how to enhance this framework for the district. We've talked about supports coming in a lot of different forms. We've enhanced course options, additional AP courses, dual enrollment opportunities, diverse course offerings, such as like an education at work or industrial technologies. We have programming changes like full day K, our full day kindergarten programming. We have staffing where we've enhanced BCBAs, school psychs, school counselors, therapeutic personnel. And we've also talked about supportive scheduling. We've recently looked at the secondary level regarding our middle school schedule, and also now talking about enhancing that development across K through 12 into our secondary programming here at the high school with that schedule. We know that early intervention is best, but we do need to be sure that we have the resources in place for our older students, that they learn at different rates, and we need to be able to respond to them at the different levels. At the high school, we recently talked about our freshman advisory course, looking at it being targeted, data-driven, opportunities for students with clubs, social emotional, being goal-oriented. We're talking about that Viking zone, having that invitation to certain students and bringing them in to support them. We thank you for all the supports up to this point, and we're looking to continue to enhance this. Again, when we talk about the intensive levels of need for students, it can be, again, on that continuum of learners. Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 are 80, 15, and 5. that idea. Intensity can be at a gifted level, intensity can be at a special education level. So I want you to understand that when we talk tier 3, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're less performing or lower performing. They could be very high performing. So think about it in those 3 systems. Okay? Mr. DeAndre is going to talk more about how we look at the data and the protocols.
Thank you, Dr. Sachs. So if systems are the way that, if they're the foundation for how we organize our work, then data helps us better understand the effectiveness of our systems and their impact on outcomes for students. So in all of our buildings across the district this year, we're working to implement a consistent protocol for looking at data, for analyzing data, and talking about data. So we want first and foremost to have a longitudinal understanding, historical understanding of our data, and you've seen some of those slides already, looking at 5-year trends, 10-year trends. And before we look at new data, making some predictions, making some assessments based on what we hope is happening, and basing that on some of the changes and some of the action plan steps that we put in place before looking at that new data. Then we want to make the data really visual for our teams and our schools, and also for all of our stakeholders in the community. The data can be a lot to process and can be a lot to digest, and it's our job as administrators to distill that data and to make it digestible for everybody, so that when we have those conversations with our teams through a consistent protocol, we're able to make accurate observations and inferences that lead to an action plan, steps of action that, again, hopefully lead to positive outcomes for our students. So that data-driven dialogue that we're implementing this year and really practicing, that's a little bit new for us in terms of, again, making it consistent across buildings. So we're hoping that in the end leads to stronger outcomes and also a consistent way of looking and talking about data as a school district.
Thank you, Dr. Sachs, and thank you, Mr. DeAndrea. Much appreciated. We're going to keep things moving. We're going to transition now. We're going to dive in a little bit deeper and look at math achievement. And there are a couple of stories from our mathematical thinkers, our students, around how they are supported in math. I'm going to introduce Mrs. Jamie O'Sullivan, the principal at South Elementary, who was previously the supervisor for STEM, and Mr. Kevin Honderhan, who is now the STEM supervisor this year. So they will tag team and talk a little bit about math achievement.
Good evening, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. So first, what you see right here is an example of a PSSA question. PSSA exams have a range of questions referred to as DOK levels. This would be a level 2 question where a student would have to make a decision about how to approach this problem. This graph right here represents across 3 through 8th grades how our students have been achieving on the math PSSA exam. I'm sure you all notice that there's a decline when kids get to middle school levels. That's something that is not just happening here at PV, that is pretty much statewide. Just as an example of that, our 4th grade scores, which are really our highest, they are at the state percentile level of 87, meaning that their scores are 87% better than the rest of the state. Our 8th graders actually fall into the same 87th percentile too. So although the scores are going down, it looks like they're actually consistent with basically how we're performing at all levels comparison to the state. Here's where we stand among other Monco districts here. We are, I believe, 8th right now, where we're at. And over time, historically, this is similar to where we've actually been. This is a comparison with PV to, as Dr. Russell was talking about earlier, the 20 to 30% band of economically disadvantaged school districts. So we're fairly consistent with that. And then you also see Montgomery County school districts and state, other districts across the state too. Here's an example of a Algebra 1 Keystone exam question. DOK level on this one would be 1. And here, students would just have to recall how to factor, for example. All right, here there's a lot of talk actually about the steep decline that we're seeing with Algebra 1 Keystone. So Algebra 1 Keystone exam is a requirement for graduation. These scores right here, you see a steep decline, but it's also important to remember that scores are reported in the 11th grade. So these scores that we're seeing, we're missing actually some of our, it's right around the COVID time that these students took these scores, and then we're also missing scores from some of our advanced learners there who were impacted by COVID who didn't take the test. So hopefully we would see next year a stark increase in scores. And here's where we stand across the county in terms of Keystone results. And this is actually an improvement from last year where we placed 11th. We moved up a couple spots. So we are not at all satisfied with saying that we have, approximately 58% or so students who are proficient or advanced on the test. We are consistently trying to work to increase that number, but just to put things in perspective, that percentile rank across the state is at 85. Being new to the district, I wanted to go out and talk to students to kind of capture their experiences with math, to see like what kind of supports they have, what gets them through challenging times, and also to see like what are like the courses that are really preparing them for the next level. So I don't know if I have time to play any of these right now.
Play one or two.
Okay, yeah, one or two. So we'll hear, but I've interviewed like 15 kids or so, and like the one thing that came back all the time was they just talked about their teachers. They talked about how impactful their teachers have been. Didn't matter how I rephrased the question, trying to get information out of them about like the supports they received or the type of courses they took. Their teachers make a difference to them, and that really came through in all the stories. I'm not sure if I'm hitting the right button there or not. Thank you.
Thank you.
Me a lot, like understanding stuff this year that like I haven't understood in the past. Yeah, he also like helps you understand like the problems like better if you're having like trouble on like a specific problem. Like her like help you get like through the problem and help you try to like solve it better.
Sixth grade, yeah, there's Miss Terry.
Yeah, sixth grade.
And she was a really good teacher, and I had a good class too. A lot of
She
friends.
teach me a lot. Yeah. So at Perkiomen Valley, I have a favorite teacher at school, and her name is Miss Dolan. And she is also my homeroom teacher. She has helpful.
That's okay. It goes on and on like that. A lot of the stories are very cute. If you have time to look at that, I implore you to. It's pretty awesome. I shared some of these stories too with the teachers, and it was just something I think that made their day. So good news is, emphatically, students really appreciate their teachers, and I think we all do too. We have been, approximately a third of our elementary staff have been trialing the iReady resource. This is something that's already used at our middle school level. iReady is known. The one important thing about it, it has a personalized learning instruction, which is a intervention for students, where it's a math program. The online component actually like dials into the specific needs of each individual kid. It also has a lot of strategies that engage learners it's known for, and also it's known for its like inquiry-based learning model of its framework of teaching. So just some highlights of the iReady resource as it's being employed by these teachers. The overwhelming feedback has been fairly positive. They really like how it engages learners, the routines that are happening, and the experiences where students actually get to share their thinking with partners. A lot of lessons incorporate those. iReady coaches have actually been in all of our buildings as well, and they've been very positive with their feedback. So they've said for all our elementary buildings we're way ahead of schedule, and they've been very positive in their feedback, saying that like they're just seeing a lot of things that we're ahead of schedule, so to speak, with the other schools that they're working with. And the data also is speaking for itself too. So of all of our schools, actually middle and elementary, we are in that top right quadrant, which is where we would like to be, showing high growth and also high achievement.
Good evening.
I'm going to speak a little bit about science achievement over the last year and then look to what science achievement might look like for our future. So as we consider our PSSAs, historically those PSSAs in science have been taken at the 4th grade level and the 8th grade level. And as you can see, our 4th graders are achieving at about a 95% proficient and advanced rate last year, and our 8th grade is at about 77%, which leads us to overall an average of 86% proficient and advanced. It is important to note that this year there will be a big change within what grade levels are tested as we move to the 5th grade taking the PSSA this year. So that lucky 4th grade class from last year gets a second round at the PSSAs this year as we make the change statewide. You can see our comparison within the Montgomery County schools. We are 4th within the county for our PSSA achievement. And you can see overall within our comparison groups, we are performing at or outperforming our different comparison groups for science PSSAs. When we move to biology at the high school, this is typically taken as a freshman or sophomore level course. You can see our achievement over the course of time as compared to our other comparison groups. Again, we are kind of right on average with the 20 to 30% economically disadvantaged group, and we are outperforming the county and the state. You can also see here where we fall. We fall 7th within the Montgomery County area. And similarly to the math comparison that was shared, we are at the 93rd percentile. So we are performing better than 93% of the school districts analyzed within the state of Pennsylvania. Now, the test is changing. So, what we have seen historically might not be, what we see in the future. So the STEEL standards are going to be introduced officially with the next school year, although lots of our teachers have already begun to make the shifts and attend to the language in the standards. I like to say it's the standards, the new STEEL standards are more about doing science rather than learning about science. So as we think historically, the old state standards are really focused about memorization and vocabulary and really just honing in on, understanding the processes of science. Well, now we're going to ask students to really engage in the science practices, so actually doing the science and applying it. So this comes to changes within the science PSSA and the Keystone. So as you can see, 50% of the old PSSA, or the PSSA that they will still be taking, or they took up until last year, was just the nature of science. Whereas this year, we're going to see a much more equitable distribution of test questions, attending to technology and engineering, earth and space science, physical science, and life science and environmental literacy and sustainability. So this means that we really need to think about what does our instruction look like, not only in our core classes, but also in some of our special areas, because those tech and engineering standards are really going to be heavy hitting within our explorations class in our elementary level, as well as some of our tech ed classes at the middle level. So the state is transitioning to this new PSSA. So this year we're transitioning with the grade level to 5th grade. They will be tested on the new state standards. So this is going to be a real look into what those new test questions will look like. It is supposed to be more rigorous, and the state is continuing to release some items for us to look at, analyze, and start to implement. This will be a waiver year, so none of the scores throughout the state will count, in terms of the data towards our overall average. The 8th graders will take the science PSSA aligned to the new standards this year. So again, we're going to get to see what that new PSSA looks like, but the high school will remain on the old standards for one more year. Next year will be the first year of implementation across all levels with the new state alignment. I'm very excited to see what our students can do as we really think about how we engage our learners in the science and engineering practices. I believe that wraps up the science section.
Thank you. So in some of these slides, the idea is to tell a bit of a story. You see the data, but also bring to life some of the things that are being considered in classrooms, how instruction is happening, how students are viewing their teachers, and the resources that we are shifting to at the middle level recently and piloting at the elementary with the hopes of introducing a more forward-thinking resource that engages our students, hands-on, collaborative sorts of math problem solving. So let's transition to ELA and talk a little bit about early literacy to start. I'll introduce Mrs. Natalie Harenko, who is our Supervisor of Humanities, along with Mrs. Leslie Nasoy, Principal at Skipback, and Mrs. Krista Venza, Principal at Schwanksville. And again, they'll tag team and talk a little bit about early literacy and literacy in general.
Ms. White, can I ask a question first?
I'm sorry? Yeah, we haven't stopped in previous sections for questions. I would rather it be at the end of the section, so I don't
have a question about what they presented. I'm just, with the state kind of doing like gimme, are they still going to report the scores to us? They still will report the scores, okay.
Okay, so that question was with regards to the new science standards,
Yeah.
just.
Yeah, if they
and
were just going to
were
report.
there
I
any-
have questions, but I'll wait for later. I just wanted to know if they're going to report our scores.
Dr. Russell, would you prefer we answer the questions in this section so it's fresh in our minds, or would you rather hold questions to the end?
I would prefer we hold questions to the end, just so we can get through everything, and then happy to go back, and we can flip back in the slides too, but I think it would be more efficient for the team. Thank you.
Good evening. We use a structured literacy approach to literacy instruction, K through 12, particularly with early literacy development. Structured literacy is an evidence-based approach to language instruction. It is explicit, systematic, cumulative, data-driven, highly responsive teaching practices that are born from the body of knowledge, research, and evidence known as the science of reading. While balanced literacy de-emphasized traditional phonics instruction, structured literacy emphasizes the explicit, systematic instruction of phonics, phonemic awareness, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, as well as other essential skills in literacy development.
So what are those features of structured literacy? We have evidence-based. Structured literacy is diagnostic, systematic, and explicit. So just kind of give you an overall understanding of each feature. Structured literacy approach includes instruction that is evidence-based in the elements, such as phonology, sound symbol association, syllables, morphology, as well as vocabulary, syntax, semantics. It all comes together to support students in how they learn to read. Diagnostic, that's individualized to meet our students' needs. This instruction is based on careful and continuous assessment, and then that content is presented but must be mastered in that degree of automaticity. Systematic, structured literacy instruction follows a logical order of language. So for each element, the teaching sequence begins with the easiest and the most basic concepts and progresses methodically to the most difficult. So it is okay to teach more than one element at one time, because eventually we want that to integrate, because that is a major element of instruction. Explicit instruction, again, structured literacy is teaching that direct teaching of concepts, skills, and those processes with a fast pace of student-teacher interaction to keep students engaged. So we just need to remember that explicit instruction is that I do, we do, you do. And this means that we introduce the concepts, the skills, and the processes in a direct manner. We model what we want our students to learn. We provide guided practice. And we then give immediate feedback. And then, of course, we want to eventually have the students independently practice. And that's what we consider that gradual release of responsibility. So again, these are the 4 features of structured literacy. So how do we assess structured literacy, and how are we doing? DIBELS is an indicator of early literacy skill development, and it does serve a guide for us to understand what are instructional decisions we should make to support a student. So as you can see, DIBLS, it stands for Dynamic Indicators of Basic Early Literacy Skills. Yes, that's a mouthful. But as you can see on the chart to the left, we have students in kindergarten, first and second grade, and how they're demonstrating they're meeting the benchmarks for beginning of the year and end of the year. But we just need to remember that this is one component of measurable data that we will be using to determine whether structured literacy approach is improving our students' reading proficiency. It will take some time for us to show that effect of that implementation of the teaching strategies. So while we're still developing, learning, and understanding the structured literacy practices, we do have preliminary DIBLS data that's indicating that we do have a great impact on our primary grades to this point. In 2022, our kindergarten went from 67% to 2024, 77%, meeting and exceeding benchmarks. First grade, in 2022, we had 77% of students meeting or exceeding benchmarks, and then 86% in 2024. All right, turn it over to Mrs. Benza.
So our data-informed instruction and our ELA small group overview, the ELA small group instruction is designed to meet the needs of all student learners through targeted, differentiated instruction. And we follow best practices in structured literacy using explicit, systematic instruction to build upon foundational reading skills. We use a variety of resources, including geodes, and those are decodable texts which align with our foundational skill lessons. And these help to reinforce phonics, literacy, and comprehension, giving students meaningful opportunities to apply what they've learned. Our goal is to build confidence and proficiency in literacy by using research-based strategies that support all learners. And to strengthen the approach, our instructional coaches model small group instruction, helping our teachers to implement structured literacy techniques effectively. And with this framework, we are providing every student with the tools and support needed to become successful readers. And if you look in the top right of the picture, you can see that one of our coaches is teaching a lesson right there with the teacher right there with the coach learning alongside. Currently, our South Elementary School has the cafeteria monitors, which is providing opportunity for our teachers to work in professional learning communities, or PLCs. And Evergreen, Skipback, and Schwenksville, we just went through the process of interviewing several individuals to join our teams at our buildings. So the PLCs bring educators together to collaborate, reflect, and grow. And these teams focus on continuous improvement, sharing goals, data-driven decision-making to enhance teaching practices, improve student outcomes. And through regular communication and collaboration, teachers analyze student data, share strategies, and refine instruction to meet the needs of their learners. And by working together, we create a supportive and dynamic learning environment that ensures our students receive the best possible education. And when you ask teachers what they need, they overwhelmingly tell us more time to work together and to collaborate. So this is something that will enhance that opportunity.
Moving into thinking about PSSAs. So this is our ELA achievement on PSSAs over time. Just like statewide and countywide, we see a dip in scores after the pandemic, and then a noticeable increase, and then either steady or slight decline. What we know about how students learn to read is that reading is a cumulative process. So we are still seeing the impact of the learning loss or gaps in learning for reading that students incurred during the pandemic. We're addressing that through our WIN period and I&E, and addressing it during Tier 1 small group instruction as well. This shows our PSSA results comparatively to the county. We are third in the county with our scores. Here is our ELA PSSA achievement with our comparison groups. And as you know, we are at the end of a 6-year curriculum cycle with our middle school level ELA resource and curriculum. So we are currently piloting 2 resources, My Perspectives and Into Reading. We are seeking a resource that is, of course, standards-based, but is also aligned with current best practices in literacy, as well as allows for easy differentiation to meet the needs of our struggling readers, to meet the needs of our readers who may have gaps, and as well as to offer enhanced opportunities for our students who are high achieving. Here are literacy Keystone achievement results in a comparative way. Currently, our literacy Keystone achievement is nearing the pre-pandemic level of achievement on this assessment. This shows our comparative data in the county. This is a summary of Keystone District achievement, as well as an average in the right-hand columns to show how we are doing with all 3 Keystone Keystone assessments. And here is the comparative data again. And I will turn it over to Mr. Fuller, Dr. Fuller and Mr. Burke.
Thank you, Mrs. Franco, Mrs. Nassoy, and Mrs. Venza. So we're going to transition from ELA data to look at college and career readiness. And we'll focus on what's happening at the high school level as we prepare our students to be future ready at that last stop before they graduate. So we have Dr. Fuller here, lead principal of the high school, and Mr. Sean Burke, Red House principal.
Okay, so we'll start with some AP enrollment data and AP testing data. So you can see our AP enrollment has held pretty steady with the exception of a dip right there in the middle in 21-22. But we are back to 619 students, even with some decreasing enrollment, taking AP tests, and they are taking 1,257 tests at the end of last year. And so you can see the number of tests corresponds generally with the number of students with an average of around 2, even though we know some take 1 and some take 6. And you can see our scores over time with a slight increase last year, and that's compared to the national scores for those national tests. So you can see we well outperformed the national averages for AP tests, with a 3.6 being our average over all of the AP tests out of 5 in the past year.
Okay, so moving on to our SAT scores and the average composite scores for our students, you can see that we continually are steady in our scoring above the national average. Our students are scoring currently at an average of 1156, where the nationally it's 1024. American College Testing is also known as the ACT. This is a test that a lot of students take in comparison to the SAT, prepare for college. The national average at 19.4, but we are steady with the state in outperforming that at 24.4, which is nice to see our students continually scoring well on that assessment.
This is the percentage of our students that attend NMTCC over time. You can see an increase over the past 3 years to 10.79. My suspicion is that as our enrollment decreases and the number of seats there stay the same, we continue to fill our seats at NMTCC. So you see the percentage go up slightly. These are the NOCTI scores. These are the career education tests that our students take, the competency exams in their different programs. We had 43 tests taken last year, 43 NOCTI tests taken last year. Blue is where our students scored advanced, and you can see the programs in which they scored advanced. Green is competent, and then you can look and see that only 3 of 43 scored below competent or basic on the NOCTI test, 3 of 43. And this is where our students head after high school based on our survey of seniors last year in the spring. You can see by and large 81.5% of our students move on to college and university, with 6.9% going on to jobs and employment, 3% to the military, 3.5% to a gap year, and then 3.9% to apprenticeship and then trade school, or apprenticeship or trade school. And then other is an encompassing category for all of the other responses that we got to that question, which include service, they include travel, they include missionary trips. So that gives you a sense of where our students go after they leave us. Can we talk about that? Okay.
Yeah.
So we are recommending a resource. We are grateful that you've approved a trial of our Viking Zone from April 1st to April 16th. This is a reiteration of what Viking Zone is for, which is to provide just-in-time support, meaning something like, I have a math test coming up and I need to see my math teacher so that I understand this. And I can get in there to see my teacher. Direct intervention is more like, hey, you're having an issue in this class in general. You need to build your skills. I'd like to see you over time. Access to professional services and facilities. That's breakfast. That's the gym. That's your counselor. That's all the people who work here that are here to support you. And you have a little bit of freedom to explore that with them. And then student individual work and/or collaboration. One of the things we've seen on our many visits to look at these zones in the morning is students working together. And so you have that group project. You now have a half an hour in the morning to work on that group project. You want to get help from a friend? You can go in and get help from a friend in the library in the morning. So we're going to try that out April 1st through 16th. I expect good things, and we'll get back to you with our results. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fuller. Thank you, Mr. Burke. And again, this is one of those strategies that we are proposing to employ after the trial, presuming that works out for our students, to really support students at the secondary level. Those supports look different than the research-based intervention resources we have available, a plethora of those really at the elementary level. So at the secondary level, we think about more time, intervention time, strategies that we employ, and how we engage students in the learning. Viking Zone is an example of something that's happening in districts around us to afford students more time for that direct instruction or that support that might get them past where they're struggling. So let's transition to another goal based on our comprehensive plan, English learners and special education students. And Mrs. Saranko will speak about the English learners. It's very ELA heavily focused. And then Mrs. Jonah Ducci, our Director of Special Education, will speak about special education and how we're doing there.
Thank you. So as you probably know, our percentage of English language learners is increasing over time, where in 2023-24 school year, we had approximately twice as many L students as we did in the 18-19 school year. This shows math achievement on PSSAs over time for our Ls. We do not have enough students who took the Keystone achievement for algebra in order to show reportable data. Our science achievement on PSSAs over time for Ls. Our Keystone achievement on biology, on the biology exam for over time for Ls in 2 of the years presented. Again, we did not have enough students taking the exam to have reportable data. And then our ELA achievement over time for PSSAs for our L students. It's important to note that each column that is shown there does not necessarily represent a cohort that we're following. The number of students might have changed. We have students who are entering the district because of our expanding population at elementary, middle, and high school levels, so that drop in achievement scores could represent an increase in number of students who are at the entering level or emerging level of WIDA access proficiency. This shows our keystone achievement for literature over time. Again, we have 2 years with unreportable data. And I will pass it over to Ms. Aducci.
Just the arrow right here?
Yes. Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. Without further ado, we'll jump into our special education data. The first slide here shows that overall, over the past several years, our special education enrollments are increasing. When we compare that to the total enrollment for our district, we see that our total enrollment numbers are decreasing. However, our special education numbers are remaining the same. This could potentially contribute to the increase in our special education enrollment overall as we maintain steady or slower rate of eligibility and enrollment for our special education students. This slide highlights our special education data. We gather this data annually for December 1 child count. This is broken down by disability category as well as by student grade level. And if we take a little bit deeper dive into our student achievement, we can see here for math achievement, our students are consistently performing in math PSSAs. Although our performance isn't as consistent in the Algebra 1 Keystone, overall, if we look at our data across the state, we see that our special education students are outperforming 85% of our other LEAs across the state. In terms of science achievement, we see a nice positive steady growth or trend line there. We're performing pretty consistently across our biology keystone exams with a slight dip there in some of those middle years. But overall, again, we are outperforming, I believe that's 89%, I believe that number says, outperforming 89% of our LEAs across the state. And last but not least, we have our ELA achievement. Again, consistent growth for our special ed population with a slight decline over the last several years. In relation to the Keystone Lit exam, we see a similar trend that we see with our general education cohort with a slight slip and then some steady growth again. But overall, for ELA, we are outperforming 92% of our LEAs across the state. Our final slide here shows us our resource recommendations for the year. Moving on, these are our recommendations to move forward with the 25-26 school year. 2 of these positions heavily reflect what we are currently covering through contracted services. That would be our occupational therapist as well as our counselor/social worker position. And the special education teacher, Dr. Russell noted before, is potentially a teacher that we would need to cover our increase in early intervention numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Aducci and Mrs. Franco. So I just want to kind of share just a bit of information in general about the experiences of our English learners, if I go back to that for a minute. In the past several years, you as a board have approved increasing the staff, ELD teachers they're called. The certification title is different from how we refer to students who qualify for that service. These students meet with an ELD teacher or an ESL teacher daily, and they receive instruction. And with the increase in the number of students that qualify comes an increased number of languages that our students are speaking. So our teachers really try to focus on supporting our students learning the English language and navigating some of the resources that they work with in their different courses to support their success, their acclimation to the school experience here, and then ultimately their success. It's not easy for our ELs or our L students, but our staff, and we're very appreciative of the opportunity to decrease the number of students per teacher, but they continue to work with our students in those areas. So once a day, they meet with their teachers as part of their daily schedule in the hopes that that experience supports them in their other core academic courses. Special ed, you know that we've been working in special education to include more of our students and expose them to the grade level curriculum. We have co-teaching pairs, we have intervention times, we have instructional seminar times where we really try to target the needs of our students in special education with the services they are eligible to receive. So we have a variety of different ways that we try and meet the needs of our special education students. First and foremost, we want to expose them to the grade level curriculum and then afford them the supports they might need, the reinforcement, the reteaching that can benefit them in the cases of special education. So we incorporated a few pictures here before we transition to student wellness of some of our students experiencing school on a daily basis. So the fourth goal that emerged from our comprehensive plan back in 2022 is really around student wellness. We were coming off of the pandemic and some really different experiences for our students, and some of our students were really influenced and impacted by some of those experiences, and it became evident to us that we needed to focus differently on student wellness. So we have Ms. Erin Dreisbach, who is a supervisor of health and wellness, along with Dr. Kloon, to talk a little bit about some of the things that we do to support our students' wellness, as well as some of the ways we monitor how we're doing. How do we measure how we're doing?
So we'll just start off with this slide on extracurricular participation. We see a pretty high percentage of high school students overall participating in athletics, clubs, or music, along with our middle level and the elementary level, grades 3 through 5. We do look at the trends as it goes up through each level. We do notice and are aware of the number of students that are participating in music. I will say of the 12% or the 203 students that are participating in music at the high school, many of them are participating in multiple music groups and are very involved. And we're certainly looking more into that number, and we're looking forward to being able to look a little bit more closely in terms of the amount of extracurriculars that students participate in. We do find this to be, though, an important protective factor in overall student wellness. And then Mrs. Erin Dreisbach will talk a little bit more about Safe to Say.
Thank you. Safe to Say, it is a youth violence prevention program, and this program teaches youth and adults how to recognize warning signs and signals, especially that may be a threat to themselves, may be a threat to others, and is to say something before it's too late. So on the contact team, on the safety team, we have our principals, our assistant principals, our chief of police, business administration, superintendent, and in the 23-24 school year, we also had our supervisor of data quality assurance. And to quickly talk about what that process looks like for a Safe to Say, there is a tip that's submitted, and then that tip is forwarded to the appropriate school team, which then investigates, intervenes, provides support as needed. And then that team follows up with Safe to Say to make sure that that situation is addressed effectively. In looking at last year's data, there were 97 total reports, and those reports varied from bullying to inappropriate language to threat against another person. And when looking at the year prior, there were 132 tips. So it was decreased from last year to the 22-23 school year. And another piece of school wellness is really looking at the Pennsylvania Youth Survey. This survey is a prevention approach. It's very much data-driven, and it really helps schools and communities address reasons for what's going on. We, in 2023, had done the survey. That survey is every other year, and it is with grades 6, 8, 10, and 12. And through that, we were able to collect some really great information and data when it came to our climate task force and looking at concerns of bullying and finding different interventions to help eliminate bullying. We also utilized it for our comprehensive plan to really look at goals moving forward within the school. And we also were able to utilize the PAYS data to look at middle school when we were looking at social emotional learning needs. A little bit of demographics. We had 48% participants female, 51 were male, and 10th grade was best represented. When we are looking at what this level data is, we're looking at the grades. We're also looking at the district. We're also able to look at our state level data, and we're even able to look at our county data. So when we are looking at all these different things, we're able to look at similarities. We're also able to look at action items and what we need to target. This is a snapshot when we're looking at risk factors and protective factors. Risk factors are conditions that increase the likelihood of a young person becoming involved in things like drug use, school dropout, delinquency, and protective factors, they help as a positive influence to buffer against some of those negative influences of risk to help reduce the likelihood of adolescents engaging in those different problem behaviors. And so for protective factors, this includes strong bonding community, family, school, and peers. So with that being said, when you're looking at those protective factors, we have family attachment. We also have opportunities for pro-social involvement. Those were definitely the top on that list. And so through the comprehensive plan, one of our goals is to develop strategies to strengthen more engagement in extracurricular activities, which then helps to combat some of those risk factors on the other side. And Dr. Clune?
I know this has already come up in the Education Committee of the Whole, but I'll simply just point out that too, related to wellness is this resource that we've talked about K through 5, as well as athletic trainer, which we think would also be very supportive overall for our wellness initiatives. And I'll just leave you with that and turn this back over to Dr. Russell.
Thank you, Dr. Clune and Ms. Dreisbach. Much appreciated. So in this section, we have shared with you some data around extracurricular participation because we believe that when students participate in extracurricular activities, it is more likely to engage them in school. And you also see some of the measures we have, whether it's through the anonymous tip system, the Safe to Say system, or that PAYS survey data. We also have anecdotal data that we gather from our counselors as our counselors work with our principals on how many touch points they've had with students, the counseling needs on the part of our students, whether they are special education students or general education students, are things that we are also monitoring. So, I'm just going to quickly move through and share very briefly now what, so what. So now we know this information. What are some of the things that we do? And you've heard a little bit about that this evening. There are curriculum review cycles that are in play, assessment development so that there are common assessments across curricular areas, and resources that are being updated to meet students where they are, and hopefully more effectively support their learning in some of the major core content areas, as well as in the case of music, an elective area, a special area. We are focusing on that early literacy skill development. We were actually very fortunate to receive the grant from Senator Muth when she advocated for monies to support schools taking a deeper dive into structured literacy, coming back to that focus on phonemic awareness, phonics, letter recognition, letter sounds, and the formation of those words as part of the reading, the decodable texts. So those finances, those funds have really supported us in diving in and setting up our teachers and our schools to have the resources that will in turn support our students. We talked a lot about math instruction and resources tonight. You heard about this iReady resource. We have that at the middle level. We are piloting it at the elementary level. There are some real positives that we see in this resource. Some of the ways that this resource supports teachers engaging students in mathematics instruction and learning are ones that we believe are positive. Special education we talked about, English learners we talked about. We are embarking upon a gifted services audit. So this isn't last year. We had an audit, an evaluation that happened 2 years ago. We had an administrator leave the district. And then as we picked that up, we had some other transitions. This year, we have proposed to you that the IU conducts an audit of our gifted services that would include documents as well as programming. And they should have a report to us by summer. And then you're aware of some schedule changes at the middle level. This is the first year of full implementation of that I&E period. At the high school, they're proposing the Viking Zone. We're going to trial that a little bit later this year. We have a grade level realignment proposal on the table because we believe that this can support student learning in those grades that we are proposing realign, plus lots more. Separate conversation, but connected to some of the things that we're thinking about as we consider ways to improve the educational experiences of our students. And then we're always thinking about school culture and climate, taking us back to that shared belief. We want our students to feel safe and supported in their schools. That is dependent to a great extent on culture and climate. So we have PBIS frameworks where we attempt to focus on some of the positive choices our students make, and at the same time, recognize those negative ones. So PBIS frameworks, restorative practices, they don't come without consequences, but there is a different sort of teachable moment approach to both of those. The Youth Aid Panel we instituted this year, so too early to tell, but we're excited to have as many interested teachers and panels set up here at the high school as we do. And then, of course, we've revised our handbooks and will continue to do that to meet the needs of our students as we think about ways to modify their behaviors when they are not meeting the expectations in their schools. And some of those under school culture and climate items there support that effort. So with that, I will turn it back to the board and we will, as a team, entertain your questions. Thank you again for the opportunity to share the information.
Thank you, Dr. Russell, and the entire administrative team. I know that this was the abbreviated version, and I know that the board has had some time to digest the 135 slides of the non-abbreviated version. So we are very appreciative of all of the hard work that has gone into the development of the annual data presentation. How I want to run comments and questions, we can go by section, if that's okay with you, Dr. Russell. Start back at the beginning with the intro, demographics, and the recommendations, and then we'll do an around the table based on the question, if there's a question for that particular section, just so we're not bouncing all over the place, and that everyone will have an equal share of being able to comment. So with that, are there any comments, questions, concerns, clarifications for the first section, the intro section with the demographics and the recommendations for the following school year, for next school year? Okay. So
Hold on. You're talking about the recommendations for staffing, or?
correct. So I'm just going section by section.
Got
Yep. Did you want to add anything there?
Wanted to make sure I was on the right slide.
Okay. So it's any of the ones that are in that section. Anyone will do. No? All right. So then we'll move on to math and science. So we'll go on to the STEM section then. Does anyone have any comments, questions with regard to that section? Dr. Campley?
So I guess my big thing with the math and science, just to kind of put into perspective, was the comment that came about. We were in the, I think it was 50th percentile for the 8th graders. No. 58th percent. No, that was all grades. Hold on. 8th grade was 47%. Math achievement and growth on the PSSAs. I think I'm on the same slide. Yes.
Where
Yep.
Kevin mentioned it was the same, even though it's
Yeah.
less.
Right. So, and the idea that even though we're in the 47th percentile, that's 47% of our students were proficient, we were still 85% out of the whole state. And that across the state, they're seeing the same trend of the amount of students that are hitting proficiency. So my question is, has there been any word from the state, because this is clearly a statewide concern, as far as, is it what they're testing, how the test is devised, because it's clearly not a PV lone issue. It's not. I know that we keep altering and we keep attempting to sort out how we teach math, which is good because we can always learn and grow and adjust and be better. But I don't see it as a PV problem. Oh my word, the world is coming to an end. PV can't teach math. I don't see it as that. I see it as there's something going on statewide with math, either in how the test is being constructed or something is larger. And I didn't know, has there been word or discussion, maybe not at the state level, but even amongst other schools?
You're talking about Algebra 1 or which one? Or just total?
I'm talking about PSSAs.
The PSSAs.
But I mean, it all kind of correlates.
You see the same thing in the algebra test as well.
Correct. Did they change the test?
But they're also all made by, they're all made by the Department of Ed.
Right.
Right? So I feel like there's a connection there.
Yeah. I mean, the whole state. I mean, you see, what year is that? 22, 23. I mean, it looks like we fall off a cliff in 22, 23, but the whole state falls off the cliff in 22, 23 as well. I can't believe that this is not an issue with the test, rather than how anybody's teaching math. It's got to be something with how we're assessing math through these tests, and I don't know how to get at what that issue is.
And when you think about your MTSS triangle, right? You think about it has to be, if there's more than 80% of your students are not doing X, then it's either the way you're teaching or it's the way you're testing. Okay, so if it was just our school, I would say it's the way we're teaching.
So let me ask you
But
this.
the fact that it's multiple schools and across the state, that brings me back to it's the way we're testing, and the fact that the people who are making the tests make both the Keystone and the PSSAs. I just want to, anyone who's out there listening, and they see these numbers, I really want to caution them to think. I don't want to see it as PV's blowing up and we don't know how to teach math, as much as there's a greater issue beyond PV.
Who takes the if you go back to the algebra Keystone, right? What grade takes the algebra Keystone?
So we have 7th grade, 8th grade, and 9th graders that take these.
And there are some kids that take these Keystones that haven't yet hit algebra.
No, well, first of all, I'd like administration to be able to respond to Dr. Campley, but as I understand it, and maybe you can wrap this into your response, for students that are double or triple accelerated, they will be taking a Keystone for material that they have not done in 1 or 2 years, perhaps. If that accurate? Or the PSSA, I guess, is really what it is.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the PSSA.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. But they've still been taught the content, it's just not fresh.
So go ahead.
So in terms of the PSSA, the PSSA is taken at each grade level. So regardless of what course they're taking on the PV math sequence, they're going to take the grade level PSSA. They will also take the Keystone at the end of Algebra 1. So some of our 7th grade students will be taking the Keystone and the 7th grade PSSA, which they had the previous year in 7th grade. Our 8th grade students that are in Algebra 1 8th grade will take the Keystone and 8th grade PSSA. They never had 8th grade math. They skip over that with our current course pathway. So what we've seen as we've looked at the data over the past couple of years is some of those students will actually perform better on the Keystone than they do on the PSSA because they simply haven't interacted with that content at the same level of depth that a student within that 8th grade course would. In terms of the algebra, as Mr. Handahan had previously stated, that drop, we reached out to some state contacts as well as the county contacts, and that drop is because in 2020, they canceled the Keystone. So if you think about in 2020 where our 11th grade students were, some of them were in that 7th grade Algebra 1 and that 8th grade Algebra 1. Those are typically our highest performing students that are not being captured in that 11th grade cohort because they didn't have to take it. It was canceled. So they didn't take it again the next year or the next year. It was just, that was done and over and we moved on. So that dip there, you're seeing it across the state. What we're hoping is as that cohort moves out, that we're going to see across the state those scores begin to increase over time. So that's that drop there. I don't know if you want to. I don't know if do you understand?
I'm not following that
So,
explanation.
So
'Cause in
this data is
2020, it looks pretty good.
This data is captured in the 11th grade year. So our students take it in 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, but it doesn't get reported to the state until the 11th grade year.
The scores are banked. So if a kid took the exam in the 7th grade, those scores aren't reported until they're actually an 11th grade student.
So it's missing an entire group.
Right.
It's missing the entire group setting when the test was canceled, which is just basically lowering everyone's net score.
Oh,
So even though they take algebra in 9th grade, forget the people who are taking it advanced. Your traditional student takes it in 9th grade. They don't get it reported until 11th
Correct.
grade?
So, for example, like what it says there, 2023-24, those are 11th graders in 23-24.
But
they actually were in 9th grade in 2022.
They didn't necessarily take the test in 23-24.
Correct.
Yes.
Oh, that's weird.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that changes all my theories on Keystone, but I still think that the PSSA bombed something out.
Yes, and actually, I'm meeting with a representative from PDE tomorrow, actually, and I can talk to Dr. Russell about. I'll ask your questions to that representative.
As you look at this, as we look at this over a 10-year yield, this year should get an anecdotal asterisk noted to it. So when it's looked at in 2034, comparable on that 10-year chart, that there's a reasoning for that, and actually the scores should be almost weighted back up based off of the cohort that comes next year. Yeah.
Because honestly, these scores that we're seeing are COVID impacted scores.
Well, they're blanked out too. It's a test that never happened.
But even still, like those are the kids who were your advanced kiddos who didn't take it. But the kids, your 9th graders who took it, who just because they didn't take it in an advanced fashion doesn't mean they couldn't pass it. So my thought is you're still getting your kids who were COVID impacted, who were taught probably some of that algebra.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, notation there is really, that's huge. I didn't realize that it wasn't.
When I said they didn't even take the class, these were kids that were potentially at home, not really experiencing.
Yeah, I didn't realize that it didn't get reported.
For years.
Yeah, I thought they reported it the year it was taken. Yeah, that's a huge difference in thought process. For this one, not for the PSSA though.
So I will say, Dr. Campley, that there are times when we look at the data from the spring administration of Keystones. However, the state does not attribute those scores to a district until students are in 11th grade. That's when they're attributed. Yeah. And Dr. Weston, just to clarify here too, there was no Keystone administered in 1920. The tests were canceled in 1920.
2020. I mean, potentially.
I'm sorry. I meant 2019, 2020. Thank you, Mr.
Woodrow
Saylor.
Wilson canceled them all.
Yeah, you're right. He got rid of them. Yes.
He was president of Princeton.
But that year, 2019, 2020, there were no tests that were administered. So that year is missing. That group never took the test. So our accelerated students, who would now be in 11th grade in the 23-24 school year, in some cases, are not in those scores for any districts in PA. And so they all felt that. So that's one theory. Is that why the scores dropped? Because we're missing some scores from some of our highest achieving math students. That's one theory that can help to explain the why of the major dip across the board.
Shouldn't we see the dip in the other keystones then as well? And I'm not sure that we do.
We would not, because those keystones are true grade level keystones. So they're taking the 10th grade ELA keystone at the end of 10th grade, right? All students are. Math is the only one that spans both middle school and high school, where we kind of peel off our most advanced learners to take Algebra 1 in 7th or 8th grade.
Okay. We used to see the scores broken out by the kids that took them in 9th grade versus the kids who took them in 11th grade. Do we have that breakout in the large slide deck?
I don't know if we've disaggregated. We can look at that and see. Our middle schools, in fact, I think there is a slide in there. It indicates the achievement on the part of our middle school students is higher than the achievement on the part of a cohort taking Algebra 1 keystones at the high school level.
Right. So I'm thinking if you showed that disaggregation, you might see something along that lines here. I'll look at the other slide deck. I
Okay.
think it might. There should be something consistent with that if we look at that. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I go back to demographics real quick?
We moved on from that section.
It
Mr.
was
Saylor.
really fast, though.
It has to be fast.
Really quick.
I mean, come on now.
We have a large Indian population, but they're not noted right there. Where are they in there?
Indians are Asian. If you mean from India, is that what you mean? Or do you mean Native Americans?
Not Native Americans.
They would be characterized as Asian.
I just want to add that the whole theory makes, I mean, it's not as bad as the dip, but when you look at biology, it's still lower. Those 10th graders, because it's
What
still
slide?
22 data, biology math, or biology keystone. That's why we're not back up yet, because those students, that's reported for 11th grade. So you're telling me that that 70% is 22 data, correct? No?
Mm-mm.
That's 23, 24? That they took the test in 23, 24? So it gets reported as a 10th grader, or do they hold that till 11th grade?
Just math.
For the cohort that takes them, because it's an end of course exam and the majority of our students take it together. But we will check on that to verify and be 100% certain, because we do have some 9th graders that take biology and some 10th graders. So we'll check on that and follow up. It's a good question.
Because the numbers there are lower too, and I
Right.
was just curious.
Right. And some of our accelerated students, if you will, as 9th graders, take that biology keystone. So we'll look at that. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm clearly stuck on the new knowledge.
Well, I don't think you're alone in being stuck, because as Mr. Honderhan said earlier, relative to other school districts across the state, we're not doing terrible. We still want more of our students to demonstrate proficient or advanced performance. That's our goal, to make sure we set our students up for success, whether it's on these exams or some other exam, SATs, PSATs, APs, etc. So there are others that are stuck.
Are there other questions with math or science section? You sure?
I do.
Okay. Yes.
How are we going to...
Demographics?
No.
Oh, okay.
How are we going to, in the future, review Steele with the changes to the report? Because obviously the first time this happens, it's going to be pretty much of a differential, and it's going to be a little bit different. So is that going to, that could potentially show a dip because it's a first-time test. And so it's hard to teach to a test that you don't know about yet.
I think that, we're going to be able to look at something like comparison data across the county and across the state. That's going to give us a good sense of how are our students doing compared to the other students in those groups, the 20 to 30% economically disadvantaged. Just how are we doing? Because we are going to have time to think, and with this trial year, hopefully we'll get some good data back of how are our teachers doing just with the soft launch of the standards and trying to attend to those practices, and then what do we need to do in the future to then improve or maintain, how we're performing. So I think that comparison will be really helpful.
I have a question. So when we talk about economically disadvantaged population, that term, the criteria to that term has changed over the years. So potentially the criteria is a little more, not less, it's allows for a larger group in 2024 compared to 2018. Is there a way to look at the data from 2018 with the new calculations to see where our economically disadvantaged population would have been with the new calculations and rerun score sets?
What do you mean new calculations? I'm sorry. What are you thinking?
So every few years, the state and the federal government change the calculations for
To qualify
Yeah.
for free or reduced.
Yeah.
We could look back, right?
Same as 2018.
I see. So if we go back to demographics there, then the wondering would be, I wasn't going to call that out.
But you did.
I didn't call it out. I think somebody else did. But so the wondering would be, what are the criteria that qualify that 15.6% versus the 23.5%, and how different are
If
they?
we took criteria for today and
Right.
implemented it in the scores in 2018, what would that look like?
Okay, so we'll work on an explanation for that and how that system works. I'm guessing there are some economic indicators and factors that are part of the formula, but we'll find out. That's a good question. I'll work with Mr. Weaver and our Director of Food Services, Ms. Gartner, on that. Ms. Widener, can you jot down these? Thank you very much.
No more demographic questions, I promise.
We're only in the science. We're going to, ELA, there's
Okay.
going to be demographic questions. No question.
So, are there any other questions in math or science? Good conversation. And really lots of the conversation that's happening in our buildings too. Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know Dr. Weston and I talked about this at the policy meeting, but
Okay.
when you're looking at it from a data presentation, the PSSAs are going to be different this year. And I would just maybe make a mental note for next year's presentation that there should be a notation that the PSSAs are being given totally different this year.
Right.
And if we see any type of, whether it's a upward or a downward trend, we should note that it was a lot different of a test this year.
Right. Apples to oranges, really. It's a new baseline. Yes, I agree.
And
Thank
honestly, that's a good point across the board, because I know this is a big conversation we're having where I'm at. For many of these students, it's a new experience taking them all online.
Yes.
So
yes.
you may see dips in general. We've had a lot of conversation at the elementary level of what it looks like having to do the writing when some of these students are not used to typing all that much.
Right.
And what will their writing scores for ELA be? So I think that's going to be a conversation in general when we get these scores back of some of the areas we may need to practice in just to be prepared to use computer literacy. So
Yeah, I and that did come up at some recent committee meetings, as Mr. Saylor mentioned, and it is a concern on the part of administration. So next year, 25-26, we are mandated to participate in the online versions. There's no choice. So this year, we are doing that to learn from that experience, to prepare our students for that experience, and then take some of those insights that we gather and apply them to next year. But lots of wonderings and lots of questions. Yeah, good point.
So that was a good transition-wise to the ELA portion for the writing. Thank you. I appreciate that. So with regards to questions in the ELA section, comments, concerns, wonderings?
Yeah, I know I asked this in the questions that I sent prior, but and I appreciate the answers, and I echo Ms. White. Thanks for everyone putting this together, and I appreciate the answers that the board received to everyone's questions. But I am really curious to when you think we're going to get some data on the movement back to a phonetic-based system. When we're going to start to see data. Is it 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, to where we can start to see concrete data and improvements?
So you mean, when will it really impact students' abilities to demonstrate themselves as readers and writers?
Yeah, because
Okay.
when this came up to the board, I think it was last year, one of my concerns was, you know, for the kids that are in maybe 10th and 11th and 12th, it's not going to
Right.
be as substantially different to them because they're a little bit older. Obviously, the new kids, it's going to make a tremendous difference. But then there's this large group of kids that I don't want this to be left behind, right?
Yeah.
And so how do we focus on that? I think the Viking time, potentially for those middle school students heading into the high school, can help if that's something that can be offered. But, you know, where do we start to see, you know, where, when, how many years would it be till we start to see substantial data coming back from the new shift?
Yeah, and I think I've asked Mrs. Horenko to come up to speak to this a little bit. She's leading a lot of this work, and I think Mrs. Nasoy pointed out to you very quickly some different data from one year to the next, just beginning versus end of year dibbles, and meeting that benchmark score to demonstrate proficiency on this particular indicator. But to dive a little bit deeper into some of what you're thinking, to project out how long will it take till we really see this. So when will our third graders be off the charts on PSSAs is one. That's not a true reading only test, but it does measure reading abilities. So when can we anticipate that, I think is really the question.
Online too.
So PDE has released a set of competencies for teachers in structured literacy practices. And those competencies are for teachers K to 8, as well as K to 12 teachers in special education, reading specialists, and ESL. The list of competencies is quite significant, and we have started to implement structured literacy practices. I don't think that we have thoroughly implemented structured literacy practices, so that work continues. However, the focus of the work primarily has been in our early grades, such as K to 2, and as Mrs. Nasoy already indicated, we're already seeing some results from that. So we anticipate that each year we'll see growing results as in response to this structured literacy practice.
So in my thought process, you're looking for, will it take 3 years? Is kind of the way that I read your question. And I think that that's a legitimate question, but I don't know if it's as cut and dry as that. But as you were asking that, and I just was looking at this and thinking, so this kindergarten cohort here is last year's, beginning of the year and end of year. But those are still half-day students. So it won't be until next year's kindergarten cohort that it'll show this year's kindergarten, which is a full day, the first full day kindergarten cohort. So that to me means when we look at, and that by that time, that cohort for kindergarten will be in 2nd grade, right? So then we would be able to compare, in my mind, next year's kindergarten full day cohort, which is this year's, to 2nd grade, which is this year's kindergarten cohort showing. I know that sounded like a circle.
That would be 23-24's half day, so yes.
Right,
I
so the
agree,
last
yes.
half day class, which is this one, to the first full day class. And then to me, that shows 2 things, right? Number 1, is the process that you're using working? And number 2, did a shift from half day to full day really have an impact? And I would imagine it would, because of I've sat in a full day kindergarten class today.
So we already have some preliminary data to show that we're on target to surpass.
I guess that's
that
my
performance.
point. So that to me is,
Yeah.
that's a 3-year time frame from last year's kindergarten to next year's data presentation, which is
Our beginning of year DIBBLS data compared to our mid-year DIBBLS data shows that we're on target to surpass that goal.
right.
Yeah.
So it would be on trend with that.
Yes.
So it would be, and then you would just map out that same cohort. If you just use the half day versus full day kindergarten as the grouping to compare against, by the time those kids are in 9th grade, you'll have real results of,
Strong foundation.
right. Just using kindergarten as an example.
Yeah, I'm just concerned now of caring about the PSSAs on this format because we're not teaching kids to read on the computer. And go ahead, Dr. Kempley.
So I'm not as concerned with them reading on the computer because they do have a lot of opportunities to do reading programs and do reading opportunities online. It's more the writing. So
Yeah, the comprehension aspect of it. Yeah, read and then follow up. Yeah.
But
the typing.
A lot of the phonics is on the computer, though.
Yeah.
the reading part is okay. It's when they have to do the written response. So when they actually have to type out their written response, they haven't had, a lot of times they don't practice the typing and getting into typing until they're getting into, like, they start to do little typing, but it's usually when they're doing like their final draft. It's not just typing to go to town first, first and final draft. It's, I've written it and now I'm going to go type it. That's where, or they type it and they have time to go back and edit. They haven't had that, I'm just going to sit down and type a response.
Sure.
Because that hasn't been what they've had to do. So there's been some talk about that's going to be something that there's going to need to be practice on in the future, but it was never an issue before. So I think that's going to be the one area. I think they'll be fine with the reading part where they read and answer questions. I think they'll be fine with the math, especially if they have opportunities to practice how to use the toggles and all the little things, which PSSA has given practice. Yeah, they've given the practice how to use the different practice components. It's the writing part that I think is going to be the most challenging for your youngest learners, the 3rd and 4th graders who don't have as much typing opportunity, where they might get frustrated because they're still doing the hunt and peck. They don't have the fluidity of writing.
Gonna bring back typing classes.
Yeah, they're going to have the hardest time, I think. And so that's the part where I think we may see the most dip in scores, is for the kiddos who don't have the fluidity of writing because they're going to be doing hunting and pecking.
Bring back typewriters.
But other than that, I'm confident with the test in all their forms, other than the writing.
I appreciate you bringing that up. I mean, one of our instructional coaches has gone to all of the schools that have students who take the PSSA to teach digital reading strategies to teachers so that they could then teach those strategies to students. For example, research shows that when we read printed text, we read in an F formation, where digital text, it's more of a Z, skimming and scanning. So our teachers are aware of that and they're talking to students about it. On Wednesday, during our half day, teachers will have time to dig into the PSSA tools and develop a plan for rolling that out to their students. But you're right, that's a great consideration regarding the typing for the writing prompt.
Who knows, maybe the PSSA people will see that the scores across the state drop in the elementary grades, and maybe for just that one portion, they'll go back to old school way for 3rd and 4th graders. Who knows?
I'm going to send them this meeting.
Just kind of as an aside with regard to the writing and the typing, I actually thought kids did get keyboarding instruction in the early grades. I believe my kids did when, back when they were in elementary school. But just again, as an aside, they both now type faster with their thumbs on their phone than I can on a keyboard. So I don't know. Maybe we need to let them use their phones for the keystones. But I want and the PSSAs. I want to talk about the PSSAs if we can go to that slide. Yeah, that one. And I put some of these in a question in an email today, Dr. Russell, for you. But I wanted to just see if we could get your thoughts about it now. I mean, we use the PSSAs kind of as a way to show how we're doing as a school or as a district, but I'd like to think that we could use those results to help our students do better as well. And so I'm looking at the numbers here. And for example, if we're looking at the grade 3 PSSA results for this year, for the last available 23-24, we had 75% of our students score proficient or advanced on the PSSA. So if I look at the enrollment report, I see there were about 327 students in that cohort eligible to take that exam. that means we had 245 students proficient or advanced. We have 82 students less than proficient. So how are we addressing the needs of those 82 students? Or how are we helping them to do better in class and in subsequent years on the testing? Do we use this as a way to identify our students that need additional intervention, and how do we give an additional intervention?
So this trend is actually more than statewide. It is nationwide. And this is kind of where the science of reading, structured literacy movement came out of, because the state of Mississippi was able to overcome this trend, and they accredited it to structured literacy practices. And so hence the movement in 2019 was really born out of Mississippi overcoming this trend, where they were historically a very underperforming state in literacy. So the adoption of structured literacy practices is one way to get past this trend. We don't want to become complacent. Yes, we're outperforming the county, we're outperforming the state, but we still have students who aren't reading proficiently, and that's a concern that we share. We're also implementing the intervention and enrichment period at the middle school, where we're addressing students who are struggling with reading and have reading gaps, as well as WIN period during in the elementary, as well as now the Viking zone, hopefully with the high school, where we could help students who are not reading proficiently.
So you're not necessarily targeting these 82 students that scored less than proficient. You're introducing a different way of teaching overall that you think will help these students come back up.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I didn't address that part of the question. So no, we are targeting those students. The PSSA data is, PSSAs are taken in the spring, we get the data in the summer, and then students return to us in the fall. So sometimes that data is kind of old or stale data. So then we do other additional screenings, such as the DIBBLs in the beginning of the year, to help us identify. But we're certainly using multiple data points, including PSSA, DIBBLs, and other assessments, STAR, Linkit, to help us identify which students need those interventions.
They're not doing DIBBLs anymore in third grade, though, right?
They do DIBBLs K through 5.
Oh,
There's
okay.
different subtests that
'Cause
they
you
do in different
you
grades.
only showed it K1, 2. Okay.
Yeah, so the older grades, grades 3, 4, 5, they do oral reading fluency. We'll do the maze for vocabulary and comprehension. And then typically they are assessed, previously they were assessed in the beginning of the year, all students, but then only tier 2 and tier 3 students were monitored for the remainder of the year. So we don't necessarily have comparison data.
Okay.
This year we started to monitor students in all grades with DIBBLs beginning, middle, and end of year.
So there are other types of screenings that are employed to identify students that need additional help and help them, get
Yes.
Improve
Yes.
over time. All right.
And I'm wondering, with the numbers that you pointed out, I appreciated that you did that in that way. I would venture that maybe that number, that 85 students or whatever, with their return data on the PSSA, that it wouldn't necessarily be a surprise for those individual students, that those students would have a layered intervention of some sort anyway.
Sometimes it can be a little bit of a surprise in third grade.
Okay.
But then the PVAS allows us to project out student performance for future grades.
Okay.
And it's not a surprise. So we can implement interventions for those students, right from the get-go.
And even if it is in that less than proficient, it doesn't mean that there wasn't any improvement. It just means that it's still less than proficient. So
Correct.
that child could have been maybe in the 30th percentile and now they're in the 40th, or that they're showing improvement and growth, but they're still not rising to the occasion.
But we've spoken in the past about, reading at grade level by third grade as
Right.
being an important milestone
Yep.
in these kids' development, is that, if you're not reading at grade level by third grade, you're going to be struggling even more
Right.
going forward. So
And
I
quicker,
don't know
right.
if you consider, a proficient and above to be grade level, or if there's another measurement or another, definition for that, but that's why I use third grade as the example.
But the proficiency is not just that one category of reading comprehension. There's other categories within what makes that proficient. I mean, I know you know that, but, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
No, it's good to keep that in mind. I mean, this is just one data point here.
The other thing to keep in mind, though, too, like when you're looking at, I keep doing that tonight. When you look at the ELA with that 75%, that 80, that's whatever the 82 number of students, and again, not that we wouldn't want them to all be, obviously, we want everybody to be proficiency, but a portion of those students that probably were not proficient, of that 80 some students, could already be getting services through special education.
That was my point.
Yeah.
So some of those students, they may not be getting interventions through win time, but they could be getting serviced through special education and be getting services in learning support and getting direct instruction in reading support services.
Or ELLs, right?
And that was another question that I had in
Or
relation to
ELLs.
this, is what's the demographics of the kids who are not scoring proficient or above? Just to help to get to know
Rhetorically,
this
right.
cohort, yeah.
Other ELA questions, wonderings? Okay, moving on to college and career ready. Any questions with regard to our
Thank you, Ms. Franco.
Thank you so much, Ms. Franco. College and career ready, AP information, anything about SAT? No one?
One quick question on the future plans, and this would be the one that the slide that that I'm talking about. When you look at the 81.5% college university, do we have any data at all on how many of those who begin college actually complete college?
No, that's a question that we've knocked around before when we've seen this category, and I don't remember that we really had a solid answer.
I don't know that I have that data readily available, but I can check it. I certainly can check for you when I go back to the guidance department.
It would have to be self-reported by the graduate, right? Yeah.
Do you ever conduct an alumni survey to follow up on questions like that?
We have dabbled in alumni survey, but we have not found a way to capture all alumni without, we just don't have the contact information. But we have attempted to connect with our alumni in the past, but we really haven't been successful at doing that. So that's something we would have to work on, because I think we would all really appreciate knowing if 82% of our students head off to college or the university level, how many are actually successful? And then how many land a job? So some of those questions are really important questions.
I wonder if it could be anecdotal in the sense that if, a large percentage goes to one particular school, and that particular school has a very high rate of graduation for four-year students, if there can be some sort of an assumption correlation in your mind. Do you think it's completely irrelevant? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that would be irrelevant.
Sorry. You wanna go?
Well, no, I was going to say, I think trying to capture that data is pretty difficult in the sense that students go to college and sometimes just don't come back to their home communities. I mean, they head off to other things or whatever. So tracking them down would be difficult or whatever. But in instances too, where they transfer to other schools or take a gap year, or while they're in college, so I think that would be kind of chasing a thing that would be very elusive to get any kind of accurate data. I think as to if anybody matriculates after leaving here from a 4 or even a 2-year school.
Difficult data, but would be really interesting. Yeah.
They do have, and they'll do this every year. They'll talk about the number of students who started out in college and the number of students who did not complete college. They can do it nationally. How can't they do it locally?
One of the things we asked last year, we had the report modified. I'm going to ask again because it's not in this report. Is the report last year was modified after the presentation to include 2-year college, community college, and then other? So, because I just pulled it up last year because this report looked different. So last year we showed other community workforce gap 2 and 4. If we could have this modified to show the same as last year.
To break down the college university into 2-year colleges also.
Yeah, it's something
Yeah.
Mr. McKinney asked last year at the presentation.
I do remember that, and that was a miss. I apologize when we were reviewing this in our comprehensive meetings.
We'll see if we can gather that from the survey. See if we can do that.
And
2-year colleges. Okay.
yeah, I
Mr.
can't
Quinn.
speak for them or volunteer, but I think there might be some opportunity, given that, of course, with privacy, respecting the privacy of the students involved and whatnot, and I don't think that'll be too hard. We do a lot of that, maintaining privacy. There is a representative sample that can be somewhat, I don't want to say easily, but can be accessed via the PVSLA. Might be able to supply that. We follow a large number of the students through their college careers and on through their graduate careers. So we have actually, I mean, probably you would say a lot of data on exactly what you're saying, and a lot of experience in the difficulties of tracking them somewhat voluntarily through their entire college career.
That's a really good point. Who would be a good person to reach out to gather those data?
I guess I'll reach out to you.
Okay.
And
Okay.
get you some contact
That'd be great.
information to start that discussion. Because I don't want to throw names out there, because we do have somebody that's in charge of our data now,
Okay.
and they're somewhat of a data person.
Okay.
So they might be able to, put together some numbers for you,
Ooh.
or to help you get access to the numbers, and we work together with the
Right.
district. So
Yes.
anyway, it's just an idea to get that information.
That would be great. Thank you. That sounds good. We'll follow up on that.
I have a question about the Viking time that is going to be piloted in April. I know that when that was presented and approved for pilot for it's the 1st to the 16th, correct?
1st to the 16th.
Correct, the 1st through the 16th, that it was done that way intentionally to hit that window of time prior to the spring break off. So I'm wondering if there would be potential, based on how it's received and how it goes, that it would come to, I guess, permanent fruition, if it goes well, for approval in May for the remainder of the school year, considering the end of the year is very full of projects and tests and things like that. It seems as though if it was successful, then there shouldn't necessarily be a delay for next year.
So that's the way it happened in North Penn, was that the staff and the students and the feedback from the community was such that they decided to continue it until the end of, they didn't take the break that they said that they would take. I have some reservations about saying that we're going to take a break, retool, because I'm afraid that we might rush feedback from people and not hear everything that we need to hear. So my intention has been to really have it be a pilot, to stop when we say we're going to stop, and to allow time for that feedback to come back in. I understand why you're asking, and I think it's going to be successful, and I want it to be, but I also want to be fair to the people who are going to give us feedback and allow them the space and time to do that. So.
Well, and that's why I was wondering if maybe the rest of April would be enough time. I mean, it's really the first half of the month, so I felt like, I don't know.
Yeah.
If you know it's good, do you need 2.5 months, or is 2 weeks enough?
I know. I wonder that too.
Yeah.
But stay tuned.
I mean,
we
you
can
know that,
continue to talk about it.
Dr. Fuller, you and I have had. I just think we should just do all of your things right away and not have to.
So
wait
do
for any
I,
of
but
it,
I
so.
have to.
I know, I get it. Go
I
through
have
the
to turn the
motions.
ship.
So in the meantime, though, I just was curious if that would have maybe potentially we could close out May and June and grant kids a little bit of a cushion for projects and things like
Understood. And I hear you and appreciate it. Thanks.
that. Anyone else? Alrighty. So that means that we are moving on to English learners and special ed. Mr. Saylor.
I have a question about slide 88.
You have to help me a little more. I don't think there are numbers. I'm sorry.
Special education students by grade.
Okay.
Couple more. Next.
Yep, right there.
So, two questions. As the grades get larger, does the population grow, or does it kind of stay the same throughout? That's the question.
The percentage?
The number. So just focusing on the far right column.
So I'm sorry, repeat your question once more.
Grade 1 is 41. Will that number stay relatively consistent for the life of their...
As they move through their years here at school. I'll have to ask Mrs. Aducci to speak to that. I don't know the answer to that.
And the reason I'm asking is because once you see a big arrow pointing to a high water mark of 88, but then the numbers before it are much, much lower than the rest of the grouping. So are we about to see a long-term downtrend in the number of special education students? Or is that number, for instance, that grade 3 at 57, is that projected to grow over the next few years?
It does. Grade 3 is actually usually the time we see the most increase in special education eligibility. So we oftentimes are putting forth interventions and putting kids through our MTSS models. We usually kind of hold off on trying to make any eligibility decisions as long as we can to see if those interventions work. Grade 3 tends to be that grade where we see, I don't want to say the explosion, but we do see an increase in eligibility of our students that are eligible.
Do grade 3 or going into grade 4?
Usually in grade 3.
So then that leads to that. So that number 57 is not projected to jump much higher as they enter grade 4?
If you look at it, if you look at the first half of the year, they'll tend to come towards the second half of the year. So it changes throughout the year and throughout grade levels. As well, we tend to have different fluctuations in terms of the eligibility of students with speech and language tends to be, heavier during the primary years, and that tends to fade away. But then we see an uptick in more of the other categories, such as a specific learning disability or emotional disturbance or AS.
And I'll just kind of throw in my hat here. So it takes 60 days, Jason, for an evaluation to be completed. So when you have the students getting referred in the fall, it takes by spring by the time you have everything hashed out.
Yeah.
And you want to keep them in the least restrictive environment. So when you're talking about a first grader, they're just entering school. They haven't yet been exposed to curriculum. We wouldn't want to say that they have a learning disability in reading when we haven't yet taught them how to read. So that number is going to be really low. Your kids that come in kindergarten and first grade that have disabilities tend to have one of the other classifications, such as autism or intellectual disability. You're not going to see your learning disabilities in math, reading, or writing until you get to first, second, third grade. Typically more third grade. So that's when your psychs are getting hit hard with the cases.
Yeah.
So your numbers will absolutely go up. That 41 will probably double by the time they get to fourth grade.
Okay. One of the things I've talked about in the past in terms of these presentations is the consistency of data from presentation to presentation. So for instance, this grid, just this far right grid, is not in the last 3 years presentation. So it's hard to take the data that's there and compare it to the previous years. And I know it's dependent on the person that does the presentation. We have liked information in the past 2 year presentations of percentages of special education students by total cohort, total grade levels, or like how many students we have. It's 16.8%. Compare that trend over year. This is the first time we're introducing by grade level. Was curious why that was introduced. I thought because we're showing potentially that these numbers are dramatically decreasing over time, but now I know that's not necessarily the case. So sometimes I think when we present the data, we need to, bring a story to it so we know, what we're potentially looking at. Because if you look at the past few presentations, this grid's not necessarily in there, so it's different.
The by grade.
Yeah. So you think, you said that 41's going to jump, or which grade?
Your first grade 41.
You think that could get up to 80?
Easily by the time that they're in fourth grade.
Okay.
Could easily jump. But you also never know.
Yeah.
You never know what's going to be in the water for that grade level. I have a first grade group right now that I just would never have anticipated. You just don't, you don't know what you're going to have. You could have just a group that has, you know, you've been talking about your EI group coming in is a group that happens to have a lot more disability that you weren't anticipating. You just don't know. So it's not a direct science. You just know that typically the trends are when you're looking at learning disabilities. I think that's the key, is when we're talking about learning disabilities, those are the ages of when they tend to be identified. But you don't know who's going to come in that has autism. You don't know when an emotional disturbance might be identified. Those things can really change depending on, you know, the trajectory of the grade, the amount of kids. That can all upset the apple cart, and numbers could look vastly different.
Does anyone else have anything else to add on that? Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Ducci. Moving on to wellness.
I'll just note that the decrease of 40% for bullying year over year in Safe to Say is tremendous. And we went from almost 1 full percent to 0.02% for threats. So those are...
Yeah, in our planning meetings, it was a sort of a remarkable data point. My caution and my question rhetorically was whether or not it was being used to the same level year over year.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if it necessarily represents what's true on the ground, but yes, reported, it looks awesome.
I have to comment on that. I was wondering the same thing, because when Safe to Say first came out, I feel like all the students jumped on it and they utilized it. And I think at some points, sometimes it was almost an overuse for some minor things. And now I think maybe it's dwindled down to either more of your more serious items or some students who are like not buying into it as much, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would be curious, independent of Safe to Say, what the reportables are for infractions, interventions in the building. But hopefully, yes, it is going in the right direction. I agree with that. I just don't know if Safe to Say is a real indicator of.
So that was one of my questions I asked that you said might get answered today, is are we seeing less incidences inside the classroom with PBIS and with Safe to Say? You mentioned that'd be something that would be addressed today. I'm curious to think what the team thinks.
Right, what the principals would say. So
I believe from the feedback I'm getting from people that I know in the community that there are less incidences of bullying in the school district now than in years. Good, those are positive trends. And now that this Safe to Say data kind of correlates that information as well, that bullying trends are down. I mean, 40% is a big number. No matter how you cut it, it's a big number.
Right.
Are we seeing that same issue inside the school?
real time, real
time,
data.
correct, yeah.
So principals were informed of some of the questions that have been posed to us so that they would not be caught off guard either.
I'll take an opportunity to speak to this since I'm probably one of the principals that didn't move buildings, and I can compare last year, this year.
Congratulations.
One of the things that we've noticed and we've already presented to our faculty a couple months ago was that the number of Swiss referrals has decreased by almost half compared to last year. And that it's not to say we don't still have disrespect, disruption, things like that occurring, but you see a drastic difference between one year to the next. Can our character ed program contribute to that? Could be a factor. A lot of factors play into that, but that was a very exciting stat to see and something we presented to our staff a couple months ago.
Thank you. I don't know, are there any other principals that want to speak to that? Anything you'd like to offer? Mr. Burke, thank you. Just another example of some anecdotal data and whether or not we're seeing some improvements in these areas.
I do think that part of it at the high school has a lot to do with maybe it's relationships where maybe some information comes to us ahead of time from students themselves, or relationships with counselors and teachers where things are still students still have challenges. There are still issues that occur. It may not, sometimes it goes to Safe to Say, sometimes it comes directly to us. I do think that the relationships that students are building with the adults in the building helps us hedge off a lot of things. And I think our counselors are working really hard to get ahead of challenges that occur for students. And a lot of things like restorative practices and relationships and resolving issues directly with students knowing that there's adults there to support. Just in 1 year, I think we're seeing some cultural improvements in that capacity. So I would say at the high school, some of those things might answer some of those things.
Great, thank you.
And I did fail to say, our PBIS program, we kicked off, we had a tremendous kickoff. It was the first year of really going into that full force. And I just wanted to acknowledge that because we have a lot of core team members working around the clock. We just had a pep rally on Friday. The first pep rally type feel we've had in over a handful of years. So that, combined with the things we're doing with Character Ed and Character Strong, are really they're making a difference.
So hopefully that helps to give you a better sense of what's happening. Thank you. All right. Other questions?
Wellness items.
Yeah.
Right, so the last two items were next steps and then our focus areas, which was our recap. Does anyone have any last thoughts, questions about focus areas, other things that maybe aren't captured here? I jotted down, I wanted to put my 2 cents in with regard to the PLC time that is going to expand to the other elementary schools, to see how that would potentially impact the grade realignment conversation. Because if we're going to be weighing options for grade realignment and we're bringing teams together, I think that would be a good opportunity to allow that, I don't want to say luxury, I would rather say necessity of that time for those groups as well.
To maintain it.
Well, it doesn't exist at the middle levels at all.
Well, actually.
Or does it?
It does. They do have team time at the middle level.
Oh, it's just called something. It's just a different.
Yes.
It's just a different grouping of time. Okay.
Yes.
But okay, so if for the 5th grade teachers that would potentially move, and the cohorts of teachers per grade that would align, they'll still have time to be together.
We certainly think that's really important. We haven't mapped out the schedule in that level of detail, but we certainly appreciate those opportunities for our staff to come together and to be able to have those data conversations that Mr. DeAndrea and Dr. Sachs were talking about.
Okay.
And really talk about the needs and strengths of their students and what we do to respond to them appropriately.
Okay. That was one of my jottings.
Yes.
Because I know that, like you said, teachers would appreciate it.
Yes.
I think in weighing the pros and cons of the realignment conversation, it would be smart to include that dialogue in, and if we do this, you will have, or if we do this, you will have. I think that would probably be appreciated by the staff.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. Thank you.
I would add to that, though, to make sure that you're looking at all of the options and
I mean in each option, Don. Yeah, absolutely. I don't mean in one particular one. I mean in every option. That piece of it, staff engagement for each other, should be considered.
Understood. Thank you. Yeah.
Anyone else? Come on, it's only like 9:15.
I don't have a clock.
I know,
I'm
but
not
it's
sure
like the
what time it
Oscars
is.
here, and I feel like
Want me
we've
to-
got at least another 2 hours.
Can I open up the big
Jason
slide?
wants to talk more about demographics. We have other questions to go.
I can open
Mr.
up the-
Weaver, anything for you?
I can open up the big slide and we could go by
Yeah,
slide
let's
by
go.
slide.
Let's start at the beginning.
I have the notes.
Perfect.
Nothing for me.
Mr. Weaver.
I
Go
just
ahead,
see
Mrs.
dollar
Mrs.
signs, that's all.
O'Sullivan.
I just want to clarify a previous question about what grade level Keystones were reported. It's 11th grade for all Keystones. So ELA, Bio, and Math are all 11th grade. So when you think about the biology, that dip could be those 9th grade students that are taking that advanced biology course. we might not have captured that data in that year.
Even if they took it in 10th grade, it's still the
It still wouldn't
22.
count, yeah.
They're still not showing up until 11th grade, which means we're not seeing
The impacts.
Yeah, so that's why it's still trending, and we're not seeing those 80s when we were seeing before, potentially.
And that biology keystone will be realigned, as Mr. Saylor was saying earlier. Next year it will be realigned, so it'll be a different test at that point.
It just shows why it was more okay.
I just wanted to clarify.
And
Okay.
That's interesting. And is that the same then for? Well, no, because ELA is 11th grade, so that won't matter.
ELA is 10th grade.
ELA is 10th grade too.
But it will be reported in that 11th grade year, so it will still
Bio
be
and ELA is the same year.
all. Yes.
Okay.
And I guess I didn't want to mention it, but I did think it earlier, so I'll just say it now. Because you've mentioned it twice about the 9th grade advanced for the bio. That is not universally accurate based on the team and the recommendation for that group of kids. So not every advanced 9th grader takes advanced. I know that you know.
Okay.
I just for the
Thank you
purposes,
for
I know that
clarifying.
you know, and I know that all of the administrators know. But I don't know if every board member or the public know that cohort of kids sometimes do wait and take bio in 10th grade as an advanced class, even though, because it wasn't recommended out of middle school.
And we would actually really recommend that our students take earth science as a 9th grade. In the 9th grade year, it is a rich course, and I know our teachers do a really nice job with that course. So that's always our recommendation. Some students
seems like
choose
it might
to
be
take
team-driven
biology.
coming out of the middle school, so that maybe is just I wasn't going to say it, but it might be something to take a
glad
look
you said
at.
it.
It's
But
on the
I said it
record.
because you kept talking about, the keystone, so I felt
But
like I had to
regardless,
say it
it's
at that
9th and
point.
10th grade data that's not being reported till 11th grade, which
Right.
means it was 22 data.
Old, yeah.
It's
right. Right.
which is meaning still COVID data.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Mrs. O'Sullivan, for that research and response.
That whole wound again.
And we are absolutely working on that consistent communication. And again, one of the goals that we have with this proposed grade realignment is to bring that consistency more seamlessly to grade level. So, but important point, it's on the record, and we will follow up and continue to work on that. Thank you.
Anyone else? The only thing I didn't see focused on here, last thought, is what has come out of the realignment conversations that we've had this last month with our special ed families with regard to transition planning. And maybe we could just add that to our focus area as well.
Yes, we will absolutely add that as a detail. Yeah, we've actually, as a team, we are breaking down transportation, teaching and learning, extracurriculars, special area subjects. Transitions was something that was really emphasized by our families.
Independent of the realignment.
You're right, independent, that's exactly right. So that's something that should be on the list regardless. So I appreciate the point, yes. And our teams are already working on that and have offered some ideas, so thank you.
Wanted to give some reassurance. I knew that, but I wanted to give reassurance to the public.
It's on the
that's come
record,
out.
right? And we're taking that very seriously because it comes from, as you've mentioned, not only our special education parents on behalf of their children, but our general education parents. We don't always expand the net in the ways that we need to support students transitioning. So, point well taken. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Russell, and the entire team. Any other last thoughts?
Thank you, team.
Going once.
Very much.
Going twice. We have everybody here. We can keep them for another 2 hours if
No.
we want.
No.
Okay.
It was 1 hour. We already went over.
Oh, is that what you promised them? 1 hour? Oh, gosh.
I suggested that might be a possibility. Ms. Widener, yes.
Yeah.
What's that?
You under-promise. You over-deliver.
We
Okay.
aimed. We had a goal.
All right, that brings us to Section 3, closing items. I open the floor again. Comments from the audience on any topic. You have 3 minutes. Open the floor. State your name and municipality, please.
Now it's on. Okay.
One second, Ms. Russell.
Sure. I won't be that long, don't worry. All I wanted to do was to congratulate the administration, the teachers, the principals, Dr. Russell on the results. It was really very interesting to see. I had not seen this data. I've not gone through this data before in the past. And when I look at the PSSAs, you know, number 3 out of 21, number 8 in math, number 4 in science, number 3 in literature, above the state and nationals in SATs and APs, or SAT and ACT, high graduation rate. I mean, it's just really phenomenal. So just really congratulations. It's all the reasons I'm proud to have my kids here. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Administrators, this is your time. You have 3 minutes. Anyone? All right. Don't say I never asked you. Don't say I never asked. Okay, section 2.03, comments from board members. Anyone? Dr. Weston.
If I may, first of all, congratulations and thank you to Dr. Russell and the other administrators who are here for giving us this terrific presentation. I'm always impressed at the way you're able to condense things and present a very comprehensive overview in a very timely manner. So again, thank you. I also, as the board representative to the PV Foundation, want to put in a plug for the annual Perkiomen Valley Dodgeball Tournament in support of the foundation. That'll be this Saturday at the high school from 9 till 5. It's a lot of fun. It's the foundation's main fundraising event for the year. Come on out, support the foundation, and have a great time watching the teams throw balls at each other.
Thank you, Dr. Weston. I don't know. I keep, you know. All right, Wade. There we go. We're all friends here now, right? Okay, so that brings us to the end of board comments. If no one has anything else, I reiterate thanks. I appreciate all of your time and effort. On Thursday, we have our final community meeting. Hopefully, we will see a lot of you there. And then 3.03, notice of video recording disclaimer, and 3.04 is adjournment. Thank you so much. See you next week.